and welcome to everybody. Really greatly appreciate your patience for the technical issues that we faced as we come into our very first online event. I'm Nancy Laux. I'm chair of the International Coalition for Children with Incarcerated Parents, or INCCIP. My day job, as you'll see from the sign in the background, is at Families Outside in Scotland, which is a national Scottish charity that works entirely on behalf of children and families affected by imprisonment. But this is an INCCIP event, and I'm really pleased to welcome you all here. So INCCIP was founded in 2015 by Francis Subi at the Wells of Hope School in Uganda. It's registered here in Scotland at Families Outside as an NGO since 2019, and it's run entirely by an elected board of 14 volunteers representing countries from all around the world. So the vision of INCCIP is to see the well-being of children with an incarcerated parent addressed in all nations and at all levels of society. And our mission is to gather and collaborate with and support a diverse range of like-minded organizations and individuals to promote more effectively and achieve the well-being of children with an incarcerated parent. So that includes so far a global conference every 2 years, starting with our first conference in New Zealand in 2017, as well as awareness raising and campaigning activities over the last few years. We're really keen to find more frequent ways for our members to connect with each other. So we've introduced this new series of online events as one way of doing that. So particular thanks to Julie Hourigan and her team at Shine for Kids in Australia for organizing the event, for providing the technical support, especially because it's 2 a.m. for her. So this is a huge ask, and I really, really appreciate what they've done to make this happen. We will have time for questions and discussions at the end. Please do leave your cameras on if you wish, just so we can share this event together. Obviously, if your bandwidth is difficult, then turn your camera off. But it'd be great to be able to see as many faces as we can. The event is being recorded and will be available to people who have registered for the event, many of whom are in time zones that make it difficult for them to join the event live. So for our first event, I'm really, really pleased to introduce our speaker, Chynna Clayton. Chynna is the founder and CEO of Matriarch Made Development, which is a US-based consulting firm that centers around helping companies and organizations develop high-performing administrative teams. She was raised by a single mother in Miami, Florida, after which she studied, a bit in between, but she studied event management, political science, and business at the University of Florida. She started out as a White House intern, but then spent years supporting the Obama administration's advanced logistical teams, and ultimately became the body woman of the former First Lady, Michelle Obama. You'll have to explain a bit more about what a body woman is. I have no idea, but it sounds very important. At the conclusion of that administration, Chynna was retained by the Obama's personal office as their director of travel and event operations. So I first came across Chynna in Michelle Obama's book, The Light We Carry. And what really struck me was the book's account of how such a capable and confident and powerful young woman such as Chynna could still feel held back by the stigma of growing up with a parent in prison. And it just shows so clearly how networks such as INCCIP still have so much to do to meet our vision of seeing the well-being of children with an incarcerated parent addressed in all nations and at all levels of society. So I have lots to talk about, but I don't want to delay any further, and just want to hand over to Chynna and say thank you again for agreeing to do this. Really appreciate your time, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Yes, Nancy, thank you so much for inviting me to join you today. I am truly excited to be in good company amongst people who can hear my story and celebrate it instead of making a spectacle of it, people who can appreciate it instead of questioning it. And, quite frankly, people who allow me the space to be vulnerable without judgment. You see, knowing someone who has gone to or is in prison is not that uncommon. Heck, when I think about my own circles, I have an uncle and a cousin who are in and out of jail. I have a great uncle who died in prison at the age of 74 after serving 33 years of a 180-year sentence for bank robbery. I have a high school sweetheart who got into trouble with the law when we were in our 20s, and he got deported as a result. So the occurrence is ever present. But for some reason, the commonness of it all didn't seem to resonate as a child with a parent in prison. My father went to prison in the early 90s when I was just 3 years old. And from 1991 to 2003, it would just be me and my mom. And my mom is a brilliant woman, strong and wise beyond her years. The day my dad went to prison, we were living with my grandma, and my mom sat me on the bed, and with tears in her eyes, she told me it was just us now and that she had to do this for me. You know, she knew she needed a career and not just a job. And given that she had quit her position at the local post office at my dad's request when she became pregnant, she enrolled in the Academy for Law Enforcement and became an officer. She strategically decided to work the graveyard shift because it allowed her the flexibility to be present for me throughout the school day. Honestly, my rearing was a community effort, as is the case with a lot of children with absent parents. When half of the parental support is not there, the village kicks in and, and they are providing the structural beams that bear the weight to keep the foundation in place. And for me, those beams were my grandmother and my great-grandmother. My mom would drop me off and pick me up from school every day. When we get home from school, she'd make sure I had dinner, sit with me to do homework, and then head to bed. On our way to work every night, she would drop me off to my grandmother's or my great-grandmother's and then return after her shift to pick me up and take me to school. My grandmothers were the ones who made sure I woke up on time every morning, got me dressed for school, made sure I had a hot breakfast, and attempted to do my hair, which my mom always somehow found herself fixing. But I saw the sacrifices that these women were making for me, and I didn't take that lightly. They showed me what it meant to think of others before yourself and how to make sacrifices for the greater good and give selflessly. My mom did not miss a beat. She attended every PTA meeting, field trip, award ceremony, Girl Scouts meeting, you name it. She wanted to make sure that my dad's absence wouldn't have an effect on me, so she made up the difference. My mom showed me what support looks like. She dedicated so much of herself to my success. But the shame of my father's incarceration would be a weight that we unknowingly carried, bearing a shame that was not ours to bear for something entirely beyond our control. You see, I grew up in a family that believed that what happened in the family stayed in the family. I didn't learn the truth about what happened to my father until I was in the 3rd grade. And before then, the story was just that my dad was in a school to learn better. A story that wasn't going to fly once we relocated to the village of Miami
Ah,
Shores after a teacher encouraged my mom to move me to an elementary
pues
school that would better
yo
nurture
estoy
the life that she
con las
saw in me.
cámaras.
Miami Shores was a neighborhood with
Ya,
pristine
ya habla
lawns,
Winnie Houston.
2-car
¿Lo traje
garages,
vos?
better funded schools, and
Parecía más linda la
people
foto.
from 2-parent households.
Bueno,
The
yo me
parents
voy.
owned boats and multiple homes, hung out at country clubs. Their moms stayed home full time and made 3-course dinners. But this was not my reality. Mine looked a lot more like visits to the federal pen with my paternal grandmother, collect phone calls from my dad, and birthday gifts that he made in his arts and crafts classes. My mom felt that we were outliers, and the cloak of shame that came from being a single Black mother with a baby daddy in prison overcame her and was a truth she was not ready to face. I found myself in a world where differences didn't spark a genuine curiosity. They weren't celebrated. Instead, they were seen as strange and breeding grounds for judgment. I realized I was part of a society that tries so hard to make you conform to their fantasies of what life should be, of how you should be, and how you should present. A society that doesn't exactly do the best job of normalizing the idea that family structures can be different, or the fact that it's okay to have a parent that's incarcerated. Instead, you feel judged and made to feel ashamed of something you shouldn't. So of course, I never felt comfortable with sharing my story and the fullness of who I was with anyone. I would go throughout most of my adolescence with this fear of being judged about my father's whereabouts. So I held it close to my chest, always avoiding any questions about him, learning how to navigate around my truth. While kids in school wore their dads and their accomplishments like a badge of honor, oh, my dad's a pilot, my dad's a firefighter, or a doctor or a policeman, I wore a badge of shame. The maternal women of my family poured a lot into me. They were my true motivation for how I moved throughout life. I didn't want their sacrifices to be in vain. I wanted to honor them by making them proud, by bringing home the grades, giving grandma something to brag to her friends about, going to college, making something of myself so that I would never be a burden to them. I often wonder how many other children of incarcerated parents feel that same self-imposed pressure, bearing the responsibility of not wanting to further burden those who volunteered as tribute. But using this as fuel, I went on to graduate third in my class of over 300 students from high school. I was class vice president all 4 years and held leadership positions in every club. I ran for school homecoming court my freshman and senior year and won. I applied to every college in the state of Florida, as well as Howard and Spelman, because Howard was the Black Harvard, and with family roots in Georgia, Spelman was the cream of the crop for Black women. But after learning that we would be paying completely out of pocket during my college visit to Howard, and then finding out that the freshman dorms at Spelman didn't have AC, and knowing how brutal Georgia heat is, I decided to go to the University of Florida because, again, not wanting to be a burden to my mother, I would be able to use my Florida Bright Future Scholarship, which covered 75% of my tuition as long as I attended a school in the state of Florida. And although I was a first-generation college student, I didn't qualify for any of the additional federal or state scholarships or even the federal Pell Grant because although a single mother, my mom made too much money, which truly wasn't enough to put a kid through college. But thankfully, my mom started a prepaid college fund for me when I was in high school, and I had been awarded a few other scholarships by way of academics and essay writing and the Miami Herald Silver Knight Award for Community Service. So we were able to cover the remaining 25%, and I didn't have to pull out any loans for college until I was accepted to an out-of-state internship. So like Nancy mentioned, while I was at the University of Florida, I majored in event management and political science with a minor in business. My senior year of college, I was required to complete an internship in my field. I applied to the White House internship program at the suggestion of my college counselor. The fall of 2010, I was accepted as an intern for the Office of Presidential Scheduling and Advance under the Obama administration. At that time, I had no idea what advance was, but I would soon learn not only would it provide the opportunity to utilize both of my degrees at once, but it quite literally was bringing together a world through events. Advance requires the ability to think outside of the box and a preparedness that makes you ready for anything and everything, which little did I know at the time, my upbringing had prepared me for, having to have learned early on how to problem solve and think quickly on multiple levels. At the end of my internship, I was offered the opportunity to go on the road doing advance and got to see much of the world as a result. I would then go on to work for the 2012 re-election campaign and the presidential inauguration. And it was over the course of my time doing advance that Mrs. Obama says she took notice of me, and ultimately led to me getting the position as her trip director and body person during the second term in the White House. So a body person is the US political term used to describe an assistant who is quite literally the right hand to a political figure, following them around the clock and accompanying them everywhere they go. You're the person closest to them, anticipating your boss's every move, playing out in your mind each scenario where something could go awry and distract them from the task at hand, blocking and tackling, guarding and protecting their time, well-being, and mood. And yet again, thanks to having an example in my mom, I knew how to be organized enough to think of someone else before yourself and anticipate their needs. So I carried those skills into this role, which established the high regard that Mrs. Obama held me. I would go on to finish out the administration with the Obamas, and having never told Mrs. Obama my vaulted truth, that my father went to prison when I was 3. And even with the closeness of our relationship and the trust we'd built, I still chose to cage myself and shrink to the shackles of shame. It wasn't until we left the White House that I built up the courage to share my story with her, which honestly wasn't prompted by some newfound bravery. My decision to shed light on such a vulnerable part of myself was motivated by fear. Leaving the White House, we were in a much smaller operation with fewer staff and less legal and communications protections in place. And with the new path that our country had chosen, we were in fact more vulnerable to attacks from the media and vicious slander, which we'd already had our taste of for the past 8 years. I didn't want someone to dig into my past and use the story of Michelle Obama's right hand having a father who went to prison to stain their legacy. And as an employee who cares about their employer, those were the kinds of things I was thinking about. So I sat her down for a one-on-one. And she later shared that she thought I was telling her that I was going to quit, and was rather relieved when she discovered that the truth was just that my father had gone to prison. To which her response was the key that unlocked decades of feelings of fear, inadequacy, and isolation. She simply said, "Is that it? Do you know how many people know someone who was gone to or that is in prison?" And like that, I felt free. I felt seen. I no longer felt alone in my experience. Sure, it took hearing from a former First Lady of the United States over 20 years after the fact for it to click for me. But my hope is that by hearing me today, others will unburden themselves of the weight of the shame, stigma, and judgment, and realize that they are not the only, and that there are other people out there who might gain help from the pieces that we are holding back. I decided to share my story as a guest on Mrs. Obama's podcast in 2020. And by choosing to take pride in myself, step out of the shadows, and move into the light, it not only did something for me, but it also allowed others to see their stories in mine. I find that the more I share the perceived imperfection in my story, the more of us continue to come out of the shadows. In every job I've had since sharing, I'm shocked to find out that someone has had a parent who has been incarcerated, whether for a long stint or in and out of prison, but they've had someone who's been incarcerated. So I continue to share because I see the atmosphere shifting. I see the stigma and the shame lifting and the shackles dropping. I also learned that every kid with an incarcerated parent doesn't look like me. And actually, most who have felt comfortable enough to share didn't look like me. And we've worked together in some of the most hollowed halls on earth. And in talking to each other, we felt visible and finally had a sense of belonging. Our truth no longer made us weak, it was the underpinning of our strength. But it took surmounting the fear that had always felt insurmountable. It took hearing the commonality to talk about it comfortably and confidently in spaces without judgment. My story began to receive even more of a spotlight when Mrs. Obama published her latest book, The Light We Carry. When the book was announced, I immediately went to my father to let him know that a part of our story was about to be revealed. His response further affirmed that I had no need to hold on to that binding shame. He said, "Chynna, that's my past, and I don't carry that with me. I've done my time, I've paid my debt for my mistakes, and I've been forgiven, and I've forgiven myself." And with that, I asked myself, if the man who committed the crime had figured out how to move past it and not carry guilt, why am I allowing it to weigh me down? And with that, the burden had been further lifted. I never thought about the effects that my father's incarceration had on me or considered the residue left behind from that trauma. I never fully allowed myself to feel the void of his absence. Nothing ever really felt like it was missing, which my family did a good job of ensuring. But it wasn't until recently, as an adult, when I began attempting to do the work of unpacking it all in therapy, that I recall memories of being a daddy's girl, sitting behind the steering wheel in my dad's lap, insisting that he brought my teacher breakfast from McDonald's when he would stop to grab me something on the way to preschool. And in therapy, I find myself describing my father as being taken from me. And for the first time in 30 years, I recognized that that must have been what I felt at age 3, when the man with such a presence in my life suddenly disappeared, and my mom was left with the difficult task of explaining it the best way she could, which was to make something up that my 3-year-old brain could comprehend. But with the prison gates and the barbed wire fences in our rear view, my father and I have been able to rekindle a bond. After all these years, without the cataract of prison, I can also see pieces of him in me, my humor, my determination, and my grit. I get that all from him. So my story is an example of what you see: the successful young woman who was blessed with the opportunity to support America's first African-American family, and more specifically, one of our most beloved leaders of our time. And it's also what you don't see: the young girl whose father went to prison, who could never fully be herself because of the shackles of shame from that experience. And all the while, that experience was breeding the ground for success. We as children of incarcerated parents need to be seen. Our experience can stoke feelings of fear, inadequacy, and isolation. All of our experiences are different, but there are often some common challenges. Feeling alone in our experience causes us to deprive ourselves, and other people never get to see who we really are. The fear of judgment casts a Goliath-sized shadow over our truth. We shrink under the weight of omission, too afraid to live in our fullness and tell our stories. We're crushed by the weight of the things we can't express, and we put ourselves in cages. I can now say that I am no longer ashamed to have had a parent who was incarcerated. I wear it as a badge of honor because the experience made me who I am, resilient, steady, and a force within this earth. I find that the only way to free myself and others from the shackles and the shadows is to share my story my way. Thank you.
Amazing, Chynna. Thank you so much. I'm trying to do my little applause reaction thing. Thank you. Good. I mean, that it's such a powerful story, and I think it's one that, you know, many people on the call, and I mean many people who'll be listening to this later will identify with. Absolutely. And I mean, I've so many questions as well but I'm conscious that other people will have some. I'll ask one first, and then I'll keep jumping in. But you mentioned, you know, at the end, especially, that as children of incarcerated parents, that you need to be seen, but at the same time, you were talking about the cloak of shame and the vaulted truth, and the active efforts to hide what was happening. So how can we, you know, balance that? Is it about having some way that, you know, is it about encouraging people to come forward? Is it about having some sort of mandatory, you know, identification process? I mean, that just really frightens me, to be honest. But it's how do you kind of square that circle, I guess?
Yeah, I think it's definitely encouraging more people to come forward. I think, you know, in myself sharing my story, and, you know, Yasmin, who's on the call, sharing her story, the more people hear that this is a common thing, the more or the less ashamed you feel, right? The more proud you can be about these things. And I think, you know, at some point, perhaps we are creating a database amongst ourselves of, you know, people who we can confide in, and you know, people who make you feel more comfortable with your truth.
Yeah, it's making sure that people hear the people
Yeah.
who are speaking out about it, I suppose, which always makes it quite challenging. And you mentioned as well that your mum was explaining to you what happened when you were 3 in a way that you could understand. How did she explain it?
Yeah, so the only thing that she could result to, because I don't think she fully knew how to explain what prison was and what that meant, was that he was in a school to do better. And so as I'm telling, you know, as a young kid, and somebody's like, "Where's your dad?" I'm like, "He's in school to do better." They're wondering, well, is he in college? Did your mom date a young guy? Or, you know, so it just breeds more questions. So in hindsight, it wasn't the best approach, right? I think, you know, the work that Dr. Avon is doing in helping parents to further explain, you know, to their kids what this is, I think that that's so crucial to this, because if I could have explained, you know, unfortunately, my father made some mistakes in life, and he's, you know, he's paying for them in prison. And again, say that with a confidence and not a shame, because again, what he did is not a result of anything that I did, right? It was beyond my control. I shouldn't carry weight or shame, the weight of shame from his transgressions. But I think the sad part is the whole family, right? From my mother, myself, his parents, we all bear that burden. And in actuality, it's not ours to bear.
Yeah. Really helpful. Can I invite others to ask questions as well? Because I mean, I've got lists, but I'm conscious that other people need to be able to jump in. So does anyone else have any questions for Chynna? Avon?
Yes. Thank you for a wonderful insight. It's awesome. And I appreciate you being transparent and vulnerable with us. I'm wondering, the question that comes to mind is, what would you say to children who are in their adolescence, their teen years, and they're going through school and they're struggling with the same thing? We're in the era of social media, and and at times other children can be quite mean-spirited. So
Mhm.
what would you say in terms of uplifting words, or how to help teens to deal with having an incarcerated parent? Some words
Yeah.
of wisdom.
Yeah. I think what I would tell a teen, what I would remind them is to look is to look inward, right? And to reflect on, and this is what helps me oftentimes in life too, when I start to feel defeated, when I start to feel like, or I'm made to feel like I don't belong in certain spaces because something's different about me. I just kind of reflect on my life and where I've gotten and the support that I've had in getting there. And, in a case with an incarcerated parent, what I've been able to do without all of the privileges that people from two-parent households have had. And just be proud of who you are, where you are, and the resilience that it takes to continue, although you may have somebody who's constantly in and out of your life because they're in and out of prison, or you may have somebody who, in my case, is completely absent because they're doing a very long stint in prison, but yet you still have the fortitude to get up every day, go to school, make the grades, figure it out. So just kind of taking a step back and recognizing how amazing you are, because the odds are stacked against you, but yet you're still able to persevere.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much. Ben, do you want to come in?
Oh, Chynna, thank you so much for such an inspiring talk and so much to think about. I was thinking, Nancy and I are involved in a project looking at the role schools can play in supporting young people who have a parent in prison. And I wondered what your experience of school was, whether it provided any support, or perhaps sometimes, sadly, it can be quite a negative experience. And I was interested in how you decided which friends you could confide in and which you couldn't, and how that was for you.
Yeah. So if I'm honest, the schools weren't super helpful. And part of it was because they didn't know, and I was not transparent about, what my family structure was. I think I recall a few instances in elementary school where, teachers would ask my mother, well, where's her father? And she'd just give the blanket statement of he's not present. So I'm not sure if we gave them an opportunity to really support us, but I think part of that was just this fear of judgment. Because at that point, do you now think my child is also delinquent because her father, made a few mistakes? So you're very afraid of that transfer. And when it came to which friends I would share with, in elementary school, I did not share with any of my friends, and it was mainly because they were all, I attended a predominantly white elementary school, so it was very apparent to me that they'd never be able to relate to what I was going through. And then I wasn't prepared to field the questions that would come as a result, because I did not know how to speak confidently about what my family structure was. I didn't know, I wasn't equipped with the language to say, not all families look the same, guys, and it's okay that my mom's a single parent and still, here for me, still supporting me, still at the Girl Scout meetings with us, so it's just like, I didn't know how to say that. And in hindsight, I wish I could have, because again, I'm sure there were other kids who also had an absent parent, whether due to incarceration or divorce, but we didn't feel as if we belonged in these environments because everybody else had two-parent households. So yeah.
And thinking about, the benefit of hindsight, is there anything you think schools could have done differently, more proactively to provide conditions which would have been supportive?
Yeah, I think, yeah, if there were more conversations about, and especially in today's day and age, which I hope is happening in schools, just about family structures looking different, right? Someone can have two dads, somebody can have two moms, somebody can have a single parent. And just if we have those conversations early on, when a kid's in first grade, to, to say, hey, let's just talk about families. What does your family look like? And make it an open discussion, an open conversation, so that more kids are hearing, oh, okay, that's okay. It's okay for you to have a parent who is in prison, or it's okay for you to have a parent who's a single mother, and really start to be more accepting of differences. I think that's the biggest thing. It's just like, we breed this culture that's like, difference, it's strange, difference is, it's unfamiliar. And it's just like, well, let's talk about differences more so that they don't feel that way to people. So I think that would be something. And when I think about high school, the fact that my mom was a single parent and made decent money, not enough, but decent money, hindered me from being eligible for scholarships. I'm just like, imagine, again, praising Yasmin for the work that she's doing, but imagine if there were more scholarships for kids with incarcerated parents, right? Imagine if they had this or more resources that are just like, we want to see you get there. And we know it's tough because grandma may not have the financial backing in order to get you there. And your grades may have been just okay, but still, society's saying not enough to fully give you money. But because that one thing that made you different, it is something that we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna invest in you. I think that would be huge.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, really insightful answers. Really appreciate them.
So much. Can I ask if anyone else has any questions? Can I just pick up on something that you mentioned there, Chynna? You said that you didn't say very much to people at school because they wouldn't understand the situation that you were in. But I mean, to some extent, that's you assuming that nobody else was in that situation either. And it's something that we hear a lot in schools, is that everyone thinks they're alone because nobody talks about it,
Yeah,
even though they're not
exactly.
actually alone.
Yeah.
Which is quite interesting. But I mean, we speak to schools who say, oh, we don't have any kids in our schools in that situation. It's like, well, they don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
It's so true. It's so true. And Nancy, I remember a situation that happened to me, which caused me to be even more closeted about my experience. And again, I am almost positive that this young lady had no idea what she was saying, but I went over to a friend's house. This is elementary school. We had a play date and she called me a bastard. And in that moment, I'm sure it's something that she heard her mom say, during a road rage rant or something. And she didn't understand just how deeply those words cut for me, because technically, that was my situation. And so at that point, I was just like, okay, I felt even more so, that I needed to guard my truth in that moment. So it was just little experiences like that where, again, I'm sure it was harmless. I'm sure she did not mean it to, because she didn't know my full story, that she didn't mean it to cut as deep as it did. But that one hurt. It's something that I still remember at 35 years old, So yeah.
Thanks. And at what stage did you realize that your dad was in prison rather than in a special school?
When I was in third grade. Because at that point, we're still visiting the prison and I'm reading and I'm really understanding, like, what is this place? And maybe I was slow to learn. I don't know, but I was in third grade and I'm just like, this is not a school. This is so not a school. And so, my mom just kind of had to sit me down and say, yes, this is what happened. This is why your dad, is now locked away. And, had to kind of undo, the story that she had originally told. And I think, again, as an adult, as I'm going through therapy, and I'm just like, I felt lied to, right? I felt like I this whole time I'm here sharing a story that again, I'm sure people are questioning, like, he's in a school? What does that mean? And so it's like, okay, now I feel dumb. Now I feel lied to. So these are feelings that I'm still, kind of processing and working through as an adult.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And again, everyone, I have lots and lots of questions. So if you want to ask a question, please wave or put your virtual hand up or shout or something. But can I just pick up on what you were saying about therapy? Because that's another question: is what kind of support actually helps? Because I mean, there's so many kids who wouldn't even have access to therapy or some sort of support. It's what is it that makes a difference to children and young adults and people as adults when they've been through this experience?
It's like we've all been saying, it's talking about it. So most recently I have a work colleague who wrote me this beautiful note, and she's just like, I too had a father who was in prison, and he was in and out of our lives. And she's just like, in hearing your story and talking to you, I just feel a weight lifted. And she's able to be vulnerable with me in a way that she didn't feel that she could with other people. And I think the key is just, again, sharing more. It's not being afraid. If you do hear somebody with a similar story, not being afraid to say, that was me too. Because the more you feel seen, the more you feel that you're not alone in this, the more you can kind of let go of the shame and release the burden. I had, again, from just being on Ms. Obama's podcast, being in her book, I had an older woman reach out, and she's like, my son is in prison, and it's the hardest thing for me to know how to talk to his young daughter about it. And so, but these are safe circles. And I think that's the thing. People need to feel like they're in judgment-free zones, right? I never ask, well, what did he do? Or what? That's none of my business. I'm just like, well, here's the approach that I want to make sure you don't take, which is don't lie to her and tell her that he's in a school to do better, because I can tell you that one doesn't work. But just really having conversations about what the experience felt like for me. Yeah.
Brilliant. You mentioned a number of life skills that you developed on the back of all this, though, in terms of problem solving and quick thinking and organizational skills and anticipating the needs of others and things. What else would you say has come out of that? Perhaps things you hadn't expected that were, I suppose, benefits of this experience. Obviously made you stronger in a lot of ways.
Oh yes, definitely stronger. I joke that it made me the perfect person to support someone at the level of Mrs. Obama, because she didn't have to worry about me and when it came to protecting her privacy, right? Because I was a very guarded private person. So, having have been from a family who's like, what we say stays here, she never had to worry about that when it came to me. But honestly, I just I think my upbringing really fostered this desire, and as I kind of mentioned in the speech, it was like this self-imposed pressure to perform, right? I saw, and I don't want to use the word burden, because my family never told me I was a burden, but I saw what my family was doing to make sure that I made it, to make sure that I had every opportunity available to me, and that there was no lack because I didn't have a dad in my life. And as a result, I was just like, I'm going to make you proud, right? I'm going to pay you back for all the sacrifices that you are making. And that's a lot of weight to put on yourself, or a lot of pressure to put on yourself as a kid. But in talking to other young people in their 20s who have had parents that, were incarcerated, they're putting that same weight on themselves. They're like, oh, I'm one of 3 siblings and I'm the oldest. And so I'm going to make sure my younger siblings are taken care of because grandma's already got her hands full with me. And so like, I'm trying to find the right word of like what it breeds in us. It's this awareness of others. It's this care. It's this, I'm sure I'm not doing this justice, but like, there's just something that comes from that experience that causes you to want to pitch in, help, do your part. Yeah.
Avon, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, so it's interesting because you almost answered my question. I told you the last time that we met, or when we first met, that as an adult, I found out, about my father. And so I had quite a different reaction. It was mixed. Actually, I was quite pissed. I was really mad because it's like, how do you live a reality of multiple narratives that you believe to be your story, but you knew that, and my story is much more complex. But I knew that something wasn't right. And so when you grow up, you kind of feel like, how did I live that? But the thing that I wanted to tap in is what I call overcompensation. I have always been like the A student, the above and beyond, always overperforming to meet that standard, the internal messaging that you have to say to yourself that I am, I fit the bill, that I'm good enough, and so my question to you and even to Yasmin is that how do you ensure, and I think I've found it now, but how do you ensure that you don't run the risk of I'm gonna say chasing the next big dream, raising the bar to the point it is astronomical, to the point where it's like, it's almost, you get the payoff, and you get the benefit because you're stepping up to that next challenge. And of course, your bar is quite high because you work with the First Lady. I don't know how you top that, but anyway, I'll pull back and listen because I'm wondering, do you find yourself at a point where it's like, no, it's like, stop raising this bar so high, or do you just enjoy that benefit of having that standard set high?
Wow. What I'll say is I think having that standard set has only paid off for me in the long run. So, I enjoy it. I recognize that it may not always be the healthiest thing. But I appreciate it. Because, and I'm not trying to be petty, but sometimes I'll look at my colleagues and the level of effort or the work that they're putting in, and I'm just like, interesting. Because again, I was taught that everything that I do is a reflection upon me, and if I just half do something, that's not good, right? So I've always been taught, give it all you got, put your best foot forward, because it's a reflection upon you. It's your name that's out there. And there was a sense of pride, or it instilled a sense of pride in my namesake, right? And so I do think that having that high of a standard has always benefited me. I think, but having that standard coupled with empathy and compassion for others was also key to kind of my success. But yeah, and again, I don't necessarily think it was something that my mother forced on me. It was all very much self-imposed. That I do know she didn't play about work and homework. She would make me rewrite homework assignments if I didn't erase well enough. But again, it just sharpened me. It caused me to really care about what I was putting out into the world. So yeah, I'd be interested to hear if Yasmin has a different feeling about setting the bar, but.
Yasmin, did you want to come in there? You had some comments in the chat as well.
Hello, friends. It's good to see you all. I'll turn on my camera. I look a mess right now. But Chynna, you did amazing.
You.
You're just amazing. Amazing.
too.
And Nancy and Dr. Hart Johnson and everyone, it's great to see you. So what exactly is the question? Because like, I understand what you were saying, Dr. Hart Johnson, about raising the bar, but like, I just don't really understand, like, do you mind just explaining to me the question a little bit?
Okay, so I was talking about the commonality, obviously, the three of us are talking about parental incarceration and having an incarcerated father. And I think that my high standards and setting the bar high and becoming an overachiever, it's not to say that there's anything wrong with it, because obviously, just like Chynna indicated, you benefit from it. The point is, and this is the part that I should have asked more clearly, there can be a quest of overachieving so much that you what would I say, overexhaust yourself with taking on so much.
Yeah. Or you
And
could,
that is the question that I should have asked, because everything that you do, this is the balance. Everything that you do will always be held to a high standard. And so because of the kinds of, people that you are, and the quality, the high quality of work that you do, if you take on too much and don't find that balance, then you're going to overextend yourself to the point where your glass is kind of empty because you poured yourself out to the world, and what have you left for yourself? That's really what I'm trying to say. And in my later stage of maturity, I finally found the courage to start saying, well, you know what? That is a shiny object and I would love to chase it, but no, let me open up that door for someone else to say yes. And that has become my balance. And I have to kind of tier what it is that I want to achieve. Don't want to do it all anymore. Just want to do what makes my my soul happy and gives me a sense of peace. So that risk, and I think this is the lesson for young kids coming up, or even adults coming up, maintain that balance, because you can overextend yourself.
I think something too
Make
that
sense?
comes from that, and just hearing you just now, that I struggle with is oftentimes when that bar is so high too, nothing's ever good enough for you. Right. I have to constantly be reminded and told, you did a great job. That was amazing. That was this, because I'm my worst critic. Right. I'm just like, but I messed that up, or I flubbed over this, or I this. And so I think that's another pressure that I kind of put on myself, of like, because the bar that I set for myself is so high, I never feel like I'm reaching it. So anyway, that's another thing that kind of comes out of that for me.
Yeah, thank you for that, Dr. Hart Johnson. Now I definitely understand where you're coming from. I too, and I too am guilty of this. I really do believe that, I'm just going to call it the overachieving, the pushing, like the pushing. It's almost like, and I've seen this with our scholars too, and I have to preach to the choir and preach to myself, where I tell them, like, you don't have to do everything at once. Don't exhaust yourself. We've got scholars that work. There's a young lady who works 3 different jobs, and she was going to school, and she was doing like a clinic. She wants to get into like family therapy, and working with young people, speech pathology for young people on the autism spectrum. And, she has been in the hospital twice because of exhaustion and because she's dehydrated, right? Like, so these are very real challenges. And for me, I believe it's a trauma response. And I agree, like with Chynna, well, for me, now that I'm older, and I have really been actively trying to do the inner work and shadow work, and like kind of unlearning some of the probably habits that I picked up along the way. So it's kind of like a two-edged sword. You know, we strive for excellence and we want to succeed. Sometimes there's a little fear there, you know, like fear of failure, fear of letting people down. But for me, I see it as a very, not only a physical, and I'll try to wrap this up, but like I see it not only as a physical challenge and struggle, but a spiritual one. It's very spiritual. And for me, I see myself as someone who has been, and I say this humbly, but it is just my framework. I see myself who has been sent to my family, my bloodlines, to break certain chains, because my family has not only dealt with incarceration, but they've dealt with cycles of alcoholism, cycles of deep depression, cycles of premature death. These are things that are patterns in the bloodlines I'm connected to. And so I am actively striving to act against, to counteract those patterns, and to establish generational wealth for future generations. And that's something that, first of all, as an African American, like that's something that most of our families don't have. Like we don't have 3 to 6 months of savings for emergencies in a lot of cases. We don't have family foundations, and like we have nothing. So we're literally, in my case, building from nothing. And so that in and of itself is a lot of pressure. and also this, like, I felt for so long that I just felt invisible. Like I felt like my story didn't matter. Like I was trying to do this thing, and there were people that were like, you're going to forget about that. And, you know, just saying things to discourage me. And so what has happened is, because of the level of excellence and the standard I've set for myself, you know, it has become a thing where it cannot be ignored. And it is literally changing the face of, you know, it's changing lives for young people who have incarcerated parents. And so, but I've had to realize, like you said, Dr. Hart Johnson, that I cannot constantly give and pour without pouring into myself. So that looks like cutting off my phone at a certain time of the day, going and getting massages, going and getting facials, you know, going to the doctors, right? Taking care of my health. But I've had to go through a lot physically and emotionally and all of that to get to the point where I realized, if I don't stop and if I don't reevaluate and do better with the balance and find some self-care and self-love, I'm going to die. I'm going to die early. And that's no longer my story. So I agree with you. Everything, you know, there's so many distractions, things that are shiny, like, okay, I want to do this leadership program. I want to travel to this place. I want to do this. I want to do this. But, you know, it's okay to say no. Like we can do the things, but we don't have to do them all at once, all the time, because we need to live. We need to sleep. We need to have and give love, and like all of these things that are essential to life. So I'm trying to figure out how to help our scholars to understand this. But it's difficult because, like I said, I really think it's a trauma response. And sometimes we don't even realize what we're doing to ourselves.
Thanks so much, Yasmin. I am going to have to jump in because although we started a bit late, I'm conscious we need to wind it up and let Julie get to bed. But I just have a couple of quick announcements. One is that we're hoping to do this as a quarterly webinar series. So we do have a couple of other plans lined up. We'll be able to send you information about the dates for future events. The next one we are hoping is going to be Benoit van Kiersblik, who's on the UN Committee of the Rights of the Child, who is going to be leading a discussion of the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child's call for evidence on children and access to justice, which is going on at the moment. So we're planning to organize some conversations around that. We also have a study week in Uganda, which is hosted by Francis Subi, who's the founder of INCCIP, as I mentioned at the beginning. And that's the week of the 14th of July, where they have a study week looking at the work that they're doing in Uganda, and hopefully ending with a symposium on creating an African coalition, which again, if you sign up to our newsletter, if you're not already a member, but you can go to the INCCIP.org website to do that. and that will have a bit more information hopefully coming out in the next couple of weeks. Which just leaves me to say thank you again so much to Chynna for your incredible discussion, for this talk that you gave us, for the time that you've given us. I'm hoping that I haven't left anything out, Avon or Ben, if I forgot anything. Nope. Okay. All
Nope.
Avon?
Nope.
Okay.
No, I was just going to echo what you said. Wonderful presentation. This is great and good seeing everyone.
So thank you so much again. And the recording will be available. We'll be able to send it to the people who've registered for the event, and Chynna will be in contact. So thank you. Thank you so much to
Thank
everybody. I
you.
really appreciate that. And thank you for your patience with the technology as well. But we'll do better next time. but many thanks. I appreciate that. Take care. Thank you.
Take care. Thank you,
Bye.
Julie. All right, bye-bye.
Thanks, Julie. Yes.